The last time we met, you were saying that your stepdad was an alcoholic. You have a brother that's an alcoholic. So I want you to share with us, the experience that you go through with them.
Yeah, listen, it's traumatic anytime someone is going through behavior that is selfish, right? And my experience with alcoholism, having never met my real father, and really desiring to be embraced and loved by my stepfather, and not really understanding his battle with alcohol. And I think the problem was, it really wasn't a battle. It was something that he happily was doing while it was destroying our family. It was destroying how we as children viewed him, because we didn't know how to deal with the addiction, and because he obviously wasn't dealing with it in a way of getting help or stopping. What we would do is we would laugh at him to cover up the pain of the reality that this is my stepfather. We knew that he was going to go to work early every morning. We knew that he was going to work hard and put in a full day's wage. We knew that the bills were covered and he was going to take care of the household. But we also knew when he came home at night, he was quickly going to get a shower. He was going to get changed, and he was going to head to the VFW because he was a veteran of a foreign war. He was in the newspapers in a heroic way for being a part of the VFW leadership, but he would get completely intoxicated. He would cheat on my mother. He had various other relationships that he had. And then one of the boys would get a call at 1, 2 in the morning to come pick him up because he was not capable of driving home. And so there was such embarrassment that was there, but it was our family secret. Yeah, well, I think that what it does, first of all, what goes on in the house stays in the house. I think that's something from our generation, right? Maybe a generation above us. But, we have a new generation now that spills the tea everywhere, right? Social media has made it possible to, if it hurts me or if it makes me feel a certain way, I'll tell it to hundreds of thousands of people that I don't even know. So we're dealing with a different type of environment today. But back then, for us, it was a matter of, I don't know that I would say that we had to parent. I was too young, I think, for that. But what I had to learn how to do was to keep secrets and to keep our dirt in the diaper, right? Like we had to hide it as well as we could, even though people could see it in plain sight. First of all, we were a blended family, so I had 2 older brothers that were his sons. Then there was myself and my older brother who were my mother's sons, so we came into that relationship in that way. And then my mother and my stepfather had my younger brother, and there's a reason why I'm sharing the order of things. And it's because with my father, my stepfather, he was a very functional drinker.
Yes.
He could drink and still function. But my younger brother, who is his son, he was not able to function. And that's really what's so heartbreaking is that I've watched my stepfather kind of hold it together. Now, my mother divorced him my junior year of high school, right? And I celebrated that because of what I was witnessing in the home. Every child wants to view their parents, and especially their father, in a heroic way. But I think that the alcoholism, I was an athlete growing up, so were my brothers. I think the alcoholism kept him away from coming to the games, right? And that devastated me as a young boy. But then it hardened me and made me bitter as I got older, because then I knew he was not going to show up for me. Well, my stepfather has passed. And the beauty of it was that I was able to see him transition from not being a good father to being a really good grandfather. And so that was good. He decided to kind of go after and tackle his alcoholism. So now it wasn't Budweiser, it was Al-Anon, right? It was the non-alcoholic beverages that he would drink. He still needed to have the taste of the beverage. But then he would have times of relapse, right? He would feel as though, well, I can do one or I can do a couple. And that may have worked one or two times, but eventually it would turn into full-blown drinking again. Now, the other problem was we always had 2 cases of beer in the second refrigerator at all times. While he would wean himself off, by that time, my younger brother, who was a very celebrated athlete, who climbed up the athletic to semi-professional football, big guy, he was fully into drinking. And so now the beers were for my younger brother to tackle while we were there at any family gathering. And that became very problematic because he would go on to have his own children. He would then go on to lose his family as a result of alcohol. I mean, that's always how it ends. I mean, people will tolerate you for so long. And then at some point, there's just not a willingness because the family's being destroyed. And I was able to witness both my stepfather and my younger brother in such drunken stupors that they would be standing while they were sleeping because they were so intoxicated. Well, it hurt my heart for him because I knew that he had inherited the disease.
Yes.
Right. And I knew that he was not prepared to deal with what he had inherited. And when I would watch him be so intoxicated in front of his own children, and then I saw the embarrassment on their face and the cover up for their dad, that it reminded me of us when we were children. And that's the generational effect of alcoholism and drug abuse.
Yes.
Yeah, well, again, we grew up in the Northeast, so culturally we didn't have any real morality or foundation of morality. There was no religion, there was no standard that was really said. So here we dive into some of the deeper stuff. And I just recently lost my mother, God rest her soul.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. But, my mother had come from being adopted, right? So she was feeling the rejection of being given away by her birth parents and then not necessarily being accepted by who adopted her, right? There was always an issue. There was always a pointing of the fingers. There was always something wrong. So now she ends up in this dysfunctional relationship with a husband who's an alcoholic, but because of the rejection of her past, she doesn't leave. She hangs in there for the children, right? She hangs in there because she doesn't want to deal with another rejection resulting in divorce. And so again, this is where the one who is wrestling and struggling with the alcoholism or the drug addiction, this is where it is so unfair to the trauma in other people's lives who already have challenges to overcome. And yet here is introduced loving somebody who's not helping you deal with your trauma, but adding to it because they love you and you're taking them down through this rough patch as well.
Right.
As I got older, I want you to understand that because I had went through my own crisis in life, I had gotten in trouble, I had been arrested, I had went to prison. Now, I don't think any of that was his fault. None of his life or behavior resulted in me making those decisions. I don't think, right? It could have its layers in there. But at that point in time, I then invited faith or Christ into my life to help change my heart, give me a standard for living, give me new power, new direction. And that's what he provided for me. Why do I share that? Because I needed that in order to forgive my dad. I don't know that I could have forgiven him without understanding the power of being forgiven, because I know I have done things that were wrong as well, right? So once the forgiveness piece comes, then the healing can begin.
Yes.
And so that was where, for me, there's this benevolent, altruistic, love for my stepdad and a greater ability to understand his struggle.
Yes.
I'm sure, now his father passed when he was around 8 years old, I think.
Okay.
So I didn't know him at all. But I would 99% guarantee that his father probably was a drinker as well, because when we would have our family gatherings, beer was always the center part of our gatherings. I mean, it was a norm. It was nothing for us to be told to go to the refrigerator and grab a beer for an adult, right? So that was a part of our culture. And again, I think that we all have the responsibility to own what we have been and what we have done. But I also think that that's why it's important for people who love us to find the courage to tell us and then kind of set a standard. Listen, I'm willing to interact with you if you want help, but if you don't want help, I'm not willing to interact with you in ways that's going to affect me, that's going to affect my relationships, and that's going to affect my children. I don't want you around my children or my family where you can affect it in a negative way. It was suggested that I gave up. No, I haven't given up. You know, I was able to find forgiveness and love from my stepfather, right? But it had to come at the price of a lot of hurt, right? And being able to understand my own need for forgiveness. My younger brother I love with all my heart. But when you don't know how to help them, and what you do just continues to go along, and now you find yourself sucked into the vacuum of, you know, being open to receive their text messages or their phone calls with no production. Right? If you're not going to work on being productive, if every phone call is going to be asking me for money, and now I've got to raise the question, what are you using the money for? Like, I shouldn't have to ask that question, right? And so there's a difference between helping somebody pay their phone bill because they spent all their money on drugs and alcohol, than somebody who really needs help because they're in a situation where they're fighting for their life. And that's the difference. Are you fighting for your life, or are you just continuing to intoxicate yourself and patronize the people who love and care about you? Part of that experience growing up, I ran from it as soon as I could. I did not want to any longer be in that household with the dysfunction that was in there. Now, understand, I wasn't physically abused. I wasn't sexually abused. Those types of traumas, you know, God forbid, right? But by the grace of God. So I didn't suffer through those things, but I knew, matter of fact, my junior year of high school, I had the opportunity because of athletics to go to a different high school. So I was emancipated away from my family. My mother signed those papers for me. And was it the best thing for me? I don't know. Maybe not. I made some bad decisions, but it was my desire to get away from what was happening in my house. And I think that that is a part of the response for people that are exposed to alcoholics, right, and drug users, is that maybe we just want to run away, but we can't. We don't have the resource, we don't have the money, we don't have the tools to be able to run away, so we feel stuck. Now we're living a life that is completely under the pressure of hating where we are and who we're around, but we can't get away from it. And it's really tough, and it's unfair. My situation, my stepdad, again, God rest his soul, I'm at peace with him completely. He had the luxury of being a part of another community, which is the Veteran of Foreign Wars, which everybody wants to celebrate their patriotism while they drive past the vet who's living under a bridge, right? You're waving your flag while you drive past the guy who needs help under the bridge. But he would go there, and that would be his hideaway. And he could hide because there was other men there doing the same exact thing. And so it became a community of people that were not just driven by the dysfunction of alcohol, but living a deceptive life and still being able to celebrate who they were because they had something else about them that was being celebrated. And so that whole thing doesn't ever deal with or confront the issue. Because you're able to cover up what your real issues are. You know, again, I wasn't a drug user, but I became heavily involved in trafficking cocaine, really because of a series of things that happened based on my family unit falling apart. And so I did that for kind of the same reason, right? I was able to have money, I was able to travel, I was able to have excitement, and it was a really fun time in my life, but I wasn't considering who I was selling drugs to was killing them and their family, right? Like for an alcoholic, it never registered for me that I was hurting other people with what I was doing. So I don't have the ability to point fingers, right? But long story short, I ended up getting a succession of rest because once I began being investigated, every time the police would see me, they'd pull me, they'd check my car, they'd look for stuff. And so I had been arrested 9 times. And on the 9th time, by that time, I was looking at charges in 2 different states and a potential 38 years in prison for trafficking guns and cocaine. Now, the whole time in my head, I'm saying, but I don't use drugs, right? Like I'm justifying the behavior because I'm not an actual user. And it was on that last arrest that the burden had become too heavy. And here's the beauty of the Almighty in my life is that He designed it in a way that I had to have it happen. Because a year and a half earlier, I had my son with his mother. My son was the one thing that I could love unconditionally, right? And so by the time I suffered this last arrest, I'm now looking at myself saying, my son is now going to have to grow up like me with a father who isn't there for him. And that was really what broke my heart. And it was then that a man, had come into the prison. I had just finished being in a fist fight with another inmate because I was really driven by anger. The anger was really built on where I had come from in my young life growing up. And a man just looked at me and he said 8 words that changed my life. He said, "You look burdened. Can I pray for you?" And that wasn't a part of my norm growing up. But in my head, it wasn't such an epiphany. It wasn't a spiritual moment. It wasn't this, a bright light that shined down upon me. It was, man, I'm in trouble and I need help. So if prayer is something that could potentially help me, yes, please pray for me. Now, what I didn't understand then, and I understand now, is that the power of prayer is to change us.
Yes.
It's not to change what's happening around us. It wasn't to change me being in prison. It was to change me while I was in prison. So I didn't get that then, but as I started finding the power now living within me and being inspired for me not to set the marker at my stepdad, but to set the marker at my heavenly dad, right? Now that he's given me a benchmark that is high, I have something to live up to. And I think that was where we missed it in my home, is I didn't have a benchmark high enough to stretch, to live up to. And once that took place in my life, and plus then I had what I call my playbook, which is the Holy Scriptures. Now I had a Christ who demonstrated walking out life with problems and confrontations, and people wanted to kill him, and people didn't believe him. Once I had the model in front of me, now it gave me an image of how I'm supposed to live my life. And I began, striving to live like Christ. And as I strive to live like Christ, I watched the things around my life begin to change because I was changing.
Hey guys, this is your girl Tam Cam, executive producer of Silver Lining Nation. Guys, thank you so much for watching another episode. Guys, make sure you share, subscribe, but most of all, stay sober. Enjoy the rest of this episode.
Yeah, listen, the first scripture that I learned was trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean to your own understanding, but in all of your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your path. Do not be wise in your own eyes, but fear the Lord and depart from evil. So real quickly, let me tell you how that helped me. Trust in the Lord. Man, I don't trust nobody.
I trust me.
Like, I don't trust anyone, and you're asking me to trust in someone that I can't even see.
Yes.
So first of all, I have to learn how to trust in someone I can't see.
Yes.
That's a pretty big deal. But the other part of it was don't lean to your own understanding. That was a huge deal because for people that are cerebral or analytical, that's what we do. We lean completely and totally on our own understanding even if that understanding is it's going to hurt somebody else, but if it's going to make me feel better, I'm going to choose me, right? And we're in a choose me generation now. Everybody's, oh, do what feels good. Well, sorry to tell you, but everything that feels good isn't good for you, right? So the end part of that scripture I just quoted, it says, depart from evil. That was huge for me, because evil was fun. Evil was enjoyable in my life. I liked being where I could do what I wanted to do because it gave me immediate gratification, self-will. So having that as a part of my framework now helped me understand there's certain places I can't go, there's certain things I can't allow myself to think, and there's certain words that I can no longer say. And when that started setting in, it provided a discipline within the framework, because here's what the Lord showed me. He said, deal with the things that you can see about yourself and correct them first. Once you have the outward things corrected, now you can focus on the inward things, which change your lifestyle and the way that you think and do things. And so that for me was the formula that helped me grow up as a man. Yeah, so, you know, the thing for me has been that now I've got years behind me of growth and change. Now my challenge is to grow at the level that I'm at.
Okay.
And I think that's where most people miss it as well. They think that because they had growth in the front end, that is going to sustain them for the rest of their lives. No, you're going to have to, at the place that you've grown to, adapt to change again.
It's continued to work.
Yeah, so I say that to say that the people that I grew up with that knew me when I was in that hustler lifestyle, when I went back, the first thing they did was challenge me with what we used to do. Let's go get some drinks. Let's go get some girls. Let's go sell some coke, right? Let's go make our money, and let's have fun. And so I was confronted with, hey man, I don't do that anymore. And that was hard because there's still a part of me that misses the fun of doing it, but understanding that it was destructive in my life, and they didn't care about my destruction. What they cared about was us being able to live the things that we used to do. And so, you know, now that I progressed on, Terrell, who's here in studio with me, Theology, you know, we've got 15, 18 years of doing life together, and we did a lot of that life in Miami Beach, which is very hedonistic, and it's easy to facilitate just the feel goods in life. But because of the power of two, and because of the power of our faith in whom created us, we also know that anytime that we're seduced into selfishness, we have to deal with the consequence of making it right. And sometimes now we've learned that the consequence of making it right is not only do I have to make it right with him, but I have to make it right with the people that I've hurt along the way. And when you mature enough, you understand that there's some things you will no longer do because you know you'll have to go make it right with people that you love and care about. No, it's different, right? So it's funny, I've had conversations with guys that went to prison who have cocaine addictions. They typically get a lighter sentence than the person that is involved with cocaine without the addiction, because they're viewed within the court as someone that had a crutch or something crippling that was causing them to partake. I didn't have that excuse, right? Yeah, well, yeah, there's a sickness, there's a disease there. I didn't have that excuse, nor did I lean on that excuse. For me, it was very entrepreneurial. I mean, it's a product and a service, right? And so for me, at that time in my life, I chose it because, you know, there was movies like Scarface, there was movies like The Godfather, there was all these movies that celebrated this lifestyle and made it look so attractive and so fun. And so I kind of got sucked into that vacuum of doing things. It's a way to get rich. Now, there were probably those desires, but it was really more about just the journey, right? I came into it young. I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 is when I ultimately would make the decision to change my life by faith. So when you're young like that, you haven't experienced the world, right? Here I was, and I wasn't a corner watcher, right? I had guys that worked the corners for me, but I focused more on dropping the bigger packages. But I would see women who were 45, 55, you know, who were married at one time, who had 3-4 children. Now they're full-blown addicts. I mean, they have left their families. They have no role in their marriage, and they are gone. And that was all new for me. And you know, the beauty is that God even redeemed that within me, because he would then take my life and he would send me back to those people to speak hope and life to them.
Awesome.
Right? Whether that's on the corner, or whether that's in a prison, he sent me back so that I can revive what at one time I was being a part of destroying. And that is, listen, you still have life, you still have breath. You know, even my younger brother, I look at I'm cheering for him. His birthday just passed, and I'm hearing him pulling himself up and doing what he can. I'm proud of that. Even though it may be way below where he wants to be, he's making the steps to get himself back on track, and I can support that.
Awesome.
And so I'm in love with that for him, and celebrating that with him, and, you know, praying that he'll just continue to receive the strength and the grace and the power to continue on that path. So here's what's interesting for me. My younger brother's 48 years old. I mean, we're talking about grown men, right? Adults. For the last 20 years, he would constantly remind us how when he was 12 years old, you know, my older brother had graduated on to college. I had moved out and went to another school my senior year of high school, and how he was abandoned by the family. Now, this is true. We grew up in a house with 5 boys until he was 12. And at 12 years old, my mother divorces his father, and now he's being raised all alone. And that had to have been traumatic for him. Now, I wasn't thinking about that when I was 16, 17 years old, right?
Right.
But as I reflect back, I say, wow, okay, yeah, that was very traumatic. But at 48, he still uses that as his trigger for his addiction and his alcoholism. And so what I've recently had to do, and it's always very volatile, because anytime you confront him on it, you know, it turns into defensiveness, it turns into tears, it turns into anger. But, you know, my older brother has really just kind of come to the end of the rope with my younger brother, because they were the most interactive with one another. And I'm sharing all of this for a purpose. It's not to spill the tea of my family. I share it because I had to share with my younger brother. Blaine, at 22, I was looking at 38 years in prison. Like, do you not think that was traumatic for me? You know, my older brother had to deal with his own situation growing up of not being in the house with the rest of us boys, but being raised by our grandmother and feeling rejected, not worthy, and less than. I said, we've all had our trauma. And for him, as someone in his addiction, I don't know that he was able to receive it the way I want him to. But at some point, I hope, from a healing standpoint, that he'll evaluate that all of us have got trauma that we're dealing with, and we've all dealt with it the only way that we knew how. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for my situation, and I've got a lot of experiences with other people that have gone through addictions. You know, when I was trafficking cocaine, I was watching guys who were shooting up and sliding down the wall, right? Passed out, knocked out. Hopefully they would revive, and if they didn't, they were dead, right? Like, it's just, it's a depart from evil kind of situation, right? And so I think the thing for me with people to understand from our perspective is, just like we've had to wait for you to get to a place to deal with it, you may have to wait for us to get to a place to deal with it when you're ready. And that's just out of fairness. It's not on your time. And some people understand what tough love is, and some people call abuse tough love. You don't have to abuse somebody to provide tough love in your decision making. You can separate how you hurt from making a good decision for yourself and for your family as it relates to a family member. So, you know, like I said, I'm rooting for my whole family. We've been dysfunctional all of our lives as it relates to our unit. And so I think that the biggest part of it is just staying in the game.
Don't leave.
Rooting and cheering for one another where we are. But I'll tell you, it does make it, I'm not going to say easier, but it does make us cheer harder when we see one another making the hard decision to do the hard thing and really working to make the change themselves. I was in prison for 2.5 years. I never got a visit from anyone in my family. No one.
Okay.
I got locked up 5 states away. But in 2.5 years, nobody, I mean, I don't know if I even got letters. Now, my mother loved me immensely, and so I would call and talk to my mother. But the point is just that it gave me 2.5 years to not make excuses. I had to focus on being a better person without any cheers, nobody patting me on my back, nobody saying great job, right? And that's what I think we want to see with people who are recovering from any type of addiction, is you're going to have to show some change without anybody cheering for you. We're at a day and a time where there's so much out here that can victimize us. It really comes down to decisions. And now I do feel badly for people who are forced into situations, forced into addictions and behaviors and things like that. But, you know, for those of us that have just made a choice to live selfishly, I think, listen, I'll quote this as kind of my ending narrative, which is when I was a child, I used to think like a child. I used to act like a child. And I used to speak like a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And I think that that's a big part of it. We have to come to a place where we grow up and we put away the childish things so we can recover the things that really matter in this life. Silver Lining Nation. I just pray that if you're struggling with any type of addiction, alcoholism, I pray first of all that you would find what I found, and that was power outside of myself. That was key for me, because while I could will the change for my own life and talk myself into it, I could also, by my feelings, talk myself out of it. But because I set a standard, or he has set a standard for me, living to his standard, asking him for forgiveness, there's so much power in asking for forgiveness when we fail, that I can pick up after making a bad decision, and I can make a decision to start afresh, start anew, and then just embracing that. So as he is loving me, I am able to love other people that maybe I have hurt along the way, the same way that I've hurt him. So the power of Christ has changed my life. It continues to do so. I am not perfect, but I am forgiven, and you can be forgiven too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dutch.